Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank goodness we got a day less than 95 degrees. That's very nice, even if it's cooled by the rain. People tell me that the rain will be gone by the time the Ravens play, so that's an extra good blessing, I suppose. Although in my day, if you were really a football person, you played in the snow. About these places, Massa and Meribah, where your fathers tested me, even though they had seen my works, as we hear in the responsorial psalm. The Reverend Sam Chandler, the Dean of the Cathedral of St. Philip in Atlanta, Georgia, asked this question: do they exist still today? Do Massa and Meribah exist today? Are they real places? Now, it was a great question. A lot of what I have here is borrowed from his commentary on the scripture, but I've also interwoven my own thoughts. He says it was a great question. The quick answer is no. No, they do not exist today. We have little idea where the actual places of Massa and Meribah were, even then other in the desert. He says, but there is a longer answer to the question. The longer answer is yes. Yes, Massa and Meribah do exist today. They exist today wherever community quarreling exists, wherever testing and strife are in the midst of God's faithful ones. The Exodus stories, he goes on to say, short and simple, tell the story of all communities and of all the communities of God. Here are the Hebrews who have been delivered from the Pharaoh by Moses. He says, you all remember the general story. They fled Egypt, the Red Sea opened up and let them pass through. They wandered in the wilderness, but they have been saved over and over again by God. And then when things get tough, they begin to quarrel. During their escape from Egypt, the Hebrews were hungry, and they complained to Moses and Aaron that they wished they were back in Egypt, or at least they had their flesh pots, their meat and bread. Now, pardon me for just a moment. The Hebrews had their flesh pots, I had my handkerchief. I'm back. So, the glory of the Lord appears in a cloud, sending quails and manna miraculously to the Hebrews. And so they are fed with meat and bread. But within days, the Hebrews complain again. But this time in chapter 17, the Hebrews are not hungry, they're thirsty. So these places are named Massa and Meribah, sites of testing and quarreling. That's what the words mean, testing and quarreling. Testing and quarreling become the two words that characterize the Hebrews. Even Moses joins in the complaining. Moses cries to God and says, what shall I do with these people? They're almost ready to stone me. So one of the most difficult features of community, apparently, and it's been around for thousands of years, is that we quarrel among ourselves. From the lowest of the people to the highest of the leaders. This is where Dr. Chandler says, the least of us quarrel, and even the best of us quarrel. Even the most grateful and faithful of us quarrel. Now, Dr. Chandler says this. Now, being an Anglican priest, he has a wife and children. And he says, isn't it odd how many family arguments occur at the dinner table? Or at least in the kitchen, while we are eating and drinking? He says, consider how our most familiar places become the places where we most quarrel. Our most intimate places, where we find great love, are also the places where we quarrel and find sometimes great division. So he says, what are we supposed to do with our quarreling and testing and striving, our Massa and Meribah? How do we find God in such a universal community phenomenon as quarreling? This goes way back. I mean, remember Adam and Eve? Set in a beautiful garden, everything that they need. They won't grow old, they won't age, they won't have no pain, they have infused knowledge. And God says, I give you all of this, but don't eat that tree over there in the corner. And all of a sudden, maybe there's something else here that we might want to have. So, Dr. Chandler says the way through our family arguments, through our community quarrels, is not to run away, but to engage them, to meet them face to face, and not to hide from contention. And that is why the gospel today has Jesus commanding his disciples to approach those who sin against them, who hurt them. And he says, and that means also that we have to turn to those who sin against us, who hurt us, and not turn our back on them because of their quarreling, but to engage them in how these actions are offensive and dividing. For two reasons. One, we are responsible for one another, as we have in the first reading from Ezekiel. But the other one is that we are responsible for the peace and welfare of the community and the church where God dwells among us and in us. We are responsible for the peace and community of the church where God dwells among us and in us. Where two or three are gathered in my name, there am I in the midst of them. And that's the kind of peacefulness and understanding that we share with one another, partly because it's necessary for salvation, but the other part is it's necessary for our staying together. And the church, among all, has to be a place, where quarrels cease. We're all sinners, every one of us. We all have offended someone in some way. We all are in need of forgiveness. And having really taken that to heart, it would seem that if anybody else comes along and for some reason we find some imperfection in them, we don't say, I'm sorry, I can come in, but you can't come in. We say is, hey, welcome to the club. We're all here. We're all here. In fact, James Joyce famously said that the word church means here comes everybody. I mean Catholic. The word Catholic means here comes everybody. And that's one reason why the church is considered Catholic. It's universal, not because it is everywhere, but because it engages everyone. Everyone. So the way through the quarreling and the complaining is just that. It's the way through, not the way around, or the way of avoidance. So when God is with us, we can find reconciliation in the places where we least expect it. The Spirit and truth of God, the reconciling Spirit and truth of God, can be found wherever Massa and Meribah exist, testing and quarreling, and they exist everywhere. Dr. Chandler says each one of us has our season of wilderness. Each one of us has our season of quarreling. And I would say that's why we need honest and truthful conversations about the strife and quarreling among us. That's why we need to approach these things honestly and truthfully. That is the path to peace. That is the path to unity. That is the path to reconciliation. And that is why, for instance, we've engaged in the past as a church with calling our people together for honest conversations about race, racial antagonisms, disunity among people and races, and to sit down and talk to each other with the respect that allows each voice to be heard rather than interrupted or spoken over, to say, here's where we are, where are you? Do we have anything in common? And I think it's also why we need to have, not to be afraid of our history, but to be able to know what it is, so that we can see where we have grown together and where we have grown apart and why. Where are the seeds of sin that still reside in our church, in our community, in our country, in the world? These are the places where mutual antagonism grows like a weed in the seemingly endless quarrel and strife, Meribah and Massa. So we are called in the scriptures today, and also with Jesus, who says, if your brother or sister sins against you, talk to them. If they aren't going to listen to one, bring a couple others along. If they don't listen to a couple, bring in the community of the church. Do the best, not to conquer them, but to win them over, because we are responsible for each other, and we are responsible for the peace of the community. Now, having said this, there is a story about Henry David Thoreau. Henry David Thoreau. When he was on his deathbed, his family sent for a minister. And the minister said, "Henry, have you made your peace with God?" And Thoreau said, "I didn't know we had ever quarreled."